The coastal wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine through the open window of Dr. Morrison's office. Joanne Hayes sat in the leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening to words she'd waited 5 years to hear. "Clean," Dr. Morrison said, sliding the chest X-ray across his desk. 5 years cancer-free, Joanne. You've beaten it. Joanne stared at the black and white image, her lungs clear and unmarked. No shadows, no ghosts. She'd survived breast cancer at 63, endured 18 months of chemotherapy that had stolen her hair, her energy, and nearly her will. But she'd fought. Michael would have been proud. Michael, the thought of her late husband still came with a dull ache, like pressing on a bruise that would never fully heal. 6 years gone, taken by pancreatic cancer just 3 months after his diagnosis. They'd planned to travel after he retired. Italy, Greece, the Swiss Alps. The brochures were still in a drawer somewhere, their corners dog-eared from hopeful browsing. "Thank you, doctor," Joanne managed, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. She left the medical building at 2:45 p.m. earlier than expected. The appointment had been scheduled until 4, but Dr. Morrison was efficient, and the good news required no lengthy discussion. Joanne walked to her car, a sensible silver Honda Accord that Michael had helped her pick out 7 years ago, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, but something felt off. The brake pedal sank too easily beneath her foot. Joanne frowned, pressed it again. Soft, unresponsive. "Damn it," she muttered. She called her mechanic, who promised to send a tow truck within the hour and provide a loaner car. While she waited, Joanne sat in the medical building parking lot and thought about her life. 68 years old, widowed, cancer survivor, retired interior architect with a modest but comfortable nest egg, $485,000, accumulated over 43 years of careful saving and Michael's life insurance payout. She'd been planning a trip. Europe, finally. Maybe next spring when her strength was fully back. The money was there, waiting, managed carefully in a retirement account that Evan helped her monitor. Evan, her son, her only child. Joanne smiled thinking of him. 35, a software engineer married to Michelle for 3 years now. They'd been so good to her during the cancer treatment. Michelle had driven her to chemotherapy appointments when Evan was swamped with work. They'd moved into her Victorian house on the coast to help with daily tasks when Joanne was too weak to manage stairs. Good kids. She was blessed. The tow truck arrived at 3:30 p.m. By 3:45, Joanne was driving a loaner, a compact sedan that smelled faintly of pine air freshener, back toward her house on Seabreeze Avenue. She'd call Evan tonight, tell him about the clean bill of health. Maybe they'd go out to dinner to celebrate. She pulled into her driveway at 4:02 p.m. The house stood as it had for 40 years, a 3-story Victorian-painted sage green with white trim, a wraparound porch, and a turret room where she'd once maintained her home office. The garden was overgrown. She'd been meaning to hire someone to handle the roses that Michael used to tend. Joanne cut the engine and sat for a moment, looking at the house. Home. Safety. Everything she and Michael had built together. Then she remembered. Her reading glasses. She'd left them on the desk in the second-floor study that morning, and she'd need them tonight to review the documents Grace Patterson had asked her to look over. Grace, her college roommate and closest friend for 47 years, was helping Joanne update her will. Joanne grabbed her purse and climbed out of the unfamiliar car. Evan and Michelle wouldn't be expecting her home this early. They thought her appointment ran until 4:30, and she usually stopped for groceries afterward. The house would be quiet. She unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The mahogany floorboards creaked softly beneath her feet, a sound she'd long ago stopped noticing. She moved toward the staircase, one hand on the curved banister. That's when she heard it. A voice, Evan's voice, coming from the living room. But it wasn't the warm, familiar tone she knew. This voice was sharp, excited, almost manic. Joanne froze on the 3rd step, her hand tightening on the banister. "Cleared 15 minutes ago," Evan was saying. "The wire went through. $485,000, Michelle. sitting in the Barbados account right now. The world tilted. Joanne's knees went weak. She gripped the banister so hard her knuckles went white. Her chest constricted. Not pain, but the sensation of all oxygen leaving the room at once. $485,000 Barbados. Wire transfer. No, she'd misheard. She must have... Michelle's voice, light and pleased. I told you the timing was perfect. She just got her 5-year clearance today. She's too relieved to notice anything for weeks. By the time she checks the account, we'll be long gone. Joanne pressed her free hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain they'd hear it. I still feel... Evan's voice trailed off. A pause. I don't know. She's been through so much. The cancer. Losing Dad. This feels like survival, Michelle interrupted, her tone turning sharp. We've talked about this, Evan. You've sacrificed enough. Your father's medical bills drained your savings. You deserve this money. She'll be fine on Social Security. She doesn't need $500,000 at her age. Silence. Then Evan quieter. You're right. I've given up too much already. This is just taking what should have been mine anyway. She won't even miss it for months. Exactly, Michelle purred. Now stop second-guessing. We have a flight to catch next Tuesday. Barbados, baby. New life. New us. Joanne couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The edges of her vision darkened. Her son. Her baby boy. The child she'd rocked through nightmares and cheered at Little League games. The teenager she'd helped through calculus. The man she'd walked down the aisle at his wedding, beaming with pride, had just stolen everything she had. Her legs moved on instinct. Backward. 1 step. 2. 3. She descended the stairs with agonizing slowness, each footfall placed with the precision of a tightrope walker. Don't make a sound. Don't let them know. The front door seemed miles away. Her hand shook as she turned the knob, eased it open just wide enough to slip through. She pulled it closed behind her with a soft click that sounded to her ears like a gunshot. Joanne stumbled to the loaner car. Her hands trembled so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Too loud they'll hear. And she reversed out of the driveway, her vision blurred with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. She drove. No destination, no plan. Just drove until she found herself in the parking lot of Pelican Point Beach, the public access area where she and Michael used to walk on Sunday mornings. Joanne put the car in park and let it all out. She sobbed. Great wrenching sounds that tore from her throat like something being ripped away. She pounded the steering wheel with both fists until her hands ached. She screamed, a raw animal sound of betrayal and anguish, into the empty car. 43 years. 43 years of 50-hour work weeks, fighting for respect in a male-dominated industry. 43 years of saving every spare dollar, investing carefully, planning for a future where she wouldn't be a burden to anyone. Gone. Stolen by the person she loved most in the world. The person she would have given it to freely, if he'd only asked. Joanne cried until there were no tears left. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen. She cried until the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Michael had always loved. Then, slowly, the tears stopped. Joanne lifted her head from the steering wheel and looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaked down her cheeks, gray hair disheveled. But underneath the wreckage, she saw something else. She saw the woman who had clawed her way through a male-dominated architecture firm in the 1980s. The woman who had buried her husband and kept going. The woman who had stared down cancer and won. Joanne Hayes was not a victim. She was a fighter. She pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her face, reapplied lipstick with a steady hand, smoothed her hair. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Grace Patterson answered on the second ring. Joanne, how did the appointment go? I've been thinking about you all. Grace. Joanne's voice was calm, eerily calm. I need you. Right now. It's an emergency. What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it the cancer? I'm fine, physically. But Grace? Joanne took a breath. Evan just stole everything I have, and I need your help getting it back. Grace Patterson's law office occupied the third floor of a renovated brick building in the historic district, 10 minutes from the beach. By the time Joanne arrived at 4:47 p.m., Grace was waiting at the door, her silver hair pulled back in its customary bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Tell me everything," Grace said, ushering Joanne into her private office and closing the door. The office was exactly what one would expect from a woman who'd spent 40 years as a litigation attorney. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stuffed with legal tomes, framed diplomas from Yale Law, a mahogany desk that had probably cost more than most people's cars. Grace had retired 3 years ago at 67, but she still maintained the office for select clients, which mostly meant helping friends in pro bono cases. Joanne sat in the leather armchair across from Grace's desk and recounted the conversation she'd overheard. Every word, every pause, every inflection. Grace listened without interrupting, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad in swift, efficient strokes. When Joanne finished, Grace set down her pen and removed her glasses. "Tell me about the power of attorney," Grace said. Joanne's stomach sank. "When I was diagnosed with cancer, Evan said we should set up a power of attorney in case I was ever incapacitated during treatment. Too sick to make decisions. He said it was just a precaution." "Did you sign it?" "Yes, 5 years ago." "Did you revoke it after your treatment ended?" Joanne closed her eyes. "No." Grace stood and walked to the window overlooking the street. For a long moment, she said nothing. "That's how he accessed your accounts," Grace said finally. "With power of attorney, he can make financial transactions on your behalf. Transfer funds, close accounts. All of it legal, on paper." "But I didn't authorize this," Joanne said, her voice rising. "I didn't give permission for him to steal." "I know, but proving that in court is complicated. He'll claim you knew about the transfer, that you approved it, that you're elderly and confused." "I am not confused." Grace turned from the window, her expression fierce. "I know that, Jo. I've known you for 47 years. Your mind is sharper than mine. But they'll try to paint you as a senile old woman who forgot she gave her son permission. That's the playbook, trust me." Joanne felt the tears threatening again and forced them back. "So what do I do?" Grace returned to her desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "We build a case, a real one. Because here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to confront them. Not yet." "What?" "Grace, they're planning to leave the country on Tuesday, which gives us 5 days. Jo, listen to me." Grace leaned forward, her eyes intense. "If you confront Evan now, they'll disappear. Barbados doesn't have an extradition treaty for financial crimes under $1 million. They'll take your money and vanish, and you'll never see a dime or your son again." The words hit like a slap. Joanne hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so consumed by the betrayal, she hadn't considered the practical reality. "What do we do?" Joanne asked quietly. "We gather evidence. Real, admissible evidence. We need them to confess on record. We need bank statements. We need to track where the money went." Grace picked up her phone. "And we need Detective Marcus Cole." Marcus Cole had the kind of face that had seen too much. Lines around his eyes, a permanent furrow between his brows, gray threading through his dark hair despite being only 42. He'd spent 15 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit before moving back to his hometown to join the local police department. "Quieter work," he told Grace once. "Less travel, more time with his daughter." He listened to Joanne's story in interview room B at the police station, his expression neutral, his pen never stopping. When she finished, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice a deep baritone with the faintest southern lilt. "I'm going to be straight with you. This is bad, but it's not hopeless." Joanne's hands clenched in her lap. "Tell me what to do." "First, we verify the transfer. I'll get a warrant for your bank records, but that'll take 24 hours. Second, we track the Barbados account. That's going to require international cooperation, which is slow but doable. He paused. Third, and this is crucial, we need a confession. On tape. Clear and unambiguous. How? Joanne asked. Marcus pulled a small device from his desk drawer, a pendant, silver with a small cross engraved on the front. You wear this. It's a recording device. Wireless, transmits directly to my phone. You go home, act normal, and you get your son to talk about what he did. Joanne took the pendant, felt its weight in her palm. You want me to trick my own son? I want you to get justice, Marcus said quietly. Mrs. Hayes, I've worked financial crimes against the elderly for a long time. You know what usually happens? The victims stay quiet. They're embarrassed. They don't want their family's dirty laundry aired. They protect the people who hurt them. And those people, they do it again. To someone else's mother. Someone else's grandmother. He pulled out a file and opened it. Inside was a photograph of an elderly woman, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. Dorothy Sullivan, Marcus said, 78. Her son and his girlfriend cleaned out her retirement account in 2019. $400,000. She was too ashamed to press charges. Now she lives in a subsidized apartment on $900 a month. Her son hasn't contacted her in 4 years. Joanne stared at the photograph. She saw herself in that woman's eyes. What do I need to do? She asked. The plan was simple in theory, terrifying in practice. Joanne would go home. She would act as if nothing had happened. She would cook dinner, make small talk, and be the devoted mother Evan expected. Tomorrow, Sunday, she would wear the recording device and create an opportunity for Evan to discuss the transfer. The key, Marcus had explained, is to seem concerned but not suspicious. You're worried about your retirement account because you want to take a trip. That's reasonable, natural. When Evan tries to explain, that's when he'll slip up. Grace had driven Joanne home, parking down the street. Are you sure you can do this? She'd asked. Joanne had looked at the house, her house, bought with money she'd earned, and thought about the boy who'd grown up there. The boy who'd learned to ride a bike in that driveway. The boy who'd cried in her arms when his goldfish died. That boy was gone. I can do this, Joanne had said. Now at 7:15 p.m., Joanne stood in her kitchen, slicing vegetables for a stir-fry. Her hands were steady, her face was composed. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Evan appeared in the kitchen doorway, Michelle behind him. They both froze when they saw her. Mom! Evan's surprise was genuine. You're home early. We thought... The appointment ran quick, Joanne said, forcing brightness into her voice. Good news, actually. 5 years cancer-free. Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. Evan crossed the kitchen and hugged her. Joanne stood rigid for a moment, then forced herself to return the embrace. This man had his hands inside her retirement account. This man was planning to abandon her. This man was still her son. That deserves a celebration, Michelle said, her smile perfect. We should go out to dinner. I'm already cooking, Joanne said. Stir-fry. Your favorite, Evan. Stay. Eat with me. Something flickered across Michelle's face. Annoyance, suspicion, but it vanished quickly. Of course, let me help. They cooked together. They set the table. They ate dinner while making conversation about Joanne's doctor's appointment, the weather, a new restaurant opening downtown. Normal, routine, familiar. And with every word, every smile, Joanne felt a piece of herself fracture. But she didn't break. She was Joanne Hayes. She'd survived worse than this. And tomorrow, she'd start fighting back. Joanne woke Saturday morning to the sound of rain against her bedroom window. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and allowed herself 5 minutes of weakness. 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what her son had done. 5 minutes to grieve. Then she got up. The recording device, the silver cross pendant, sat on her nightstand. Marcus had shown her how to activate it. Press the top of the cross twice, quickly. A tiny LED would flash once, invisible unless you were looking for it. From that moment, everything would be recorded and transmitted to Marcus's phone. Joanne picked up the pendant and fastened it around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin. In the mirror, she looked like herself. Gray hair neatly brushed, minimal makeup, a lavender cardigan over a white blouse, comfortable slacks. She looked like someone's mother, someone's grandmother. She looked like a target. Downstairs, she found Evan and Michelle in the kitchen. Michelle was making coffee, wearing one of Joanne's robes, a small presumption that would have seemed sweet yesterday. Now it felt like theft. "Morning, Mom," Evan said, glancing up from his laptop. "How'd you sleep?" "Wonderfully," Joanne lied. She'd gotten maybe 3 hours, the rest spent staring at the ceiling or crying silently into her pillow. "What are you two up to today?" "Just some work stuff," Evan said vaguely. Planning to steal from me and disappear," Joanne thought. Out loud, she said, "Well, don't work too hard, it's Saturday." She made herself toast and sat at the kitchen table, watching them. Really watching them. Michelle moved through the kitchen with the confidence of ownership, opening cabinets, knowing where things were kept. She'd been living here on and off for 3 years. Joanne had welcomed her, treated her like a daughter. "Mom?" Evan's voice broke through her thoughts. "You okay? You look tired." "Just thinking," Joanne said, "about the future. Now that I'm cancer-free, I've been wanting to travel. Europe, maybe. I was thinking I might withdraw some money from the retirement account. Just enough for a nice trip. Maybe 10,000. The kitchen went silent. Joanne watched them exchange a glance. Quick, loaded with meaning. "That sounds great, Mom," Evan said, his voice tight. "But maybe wait a bit? The market's volatile right now. Bad time to pull out funds." "Oh," Joanne said, injecting confusion into her voice. "I didn't know. You've been managing it so well, I just assumed—" "I have been managing it," Evan said quickly. Too quickly. "That's why I'm saying maybe hold off. Just for a few weeks." "A few weeks? They'd be gone by then." Joanne nodded slowly. "If you think that's best, you understand these things better than I do." She saw Michelle relax slightly, saw Evan's shoulders drop. They thought she believed them. Good. Marcus called at 11 a.m. Joanne was in her bedroom with the door closed, speaking quietly. "I've got something," Marcus said without preamble. "On Michelle." Joanne's pulse quickened. "What?" "Her real name is Michelle Rodriguez. She's changed it twice. Legally. First time in 2016, second time in 2020, when she married your son." Marcus paused. "Mrs. Hayes, your daughter-in-law has a history." He laid it out in clinical detail. 2 previous relationships with men who had wealthy elderly parents. 2 previous disappearances of retirement funds. 2 previous cases that never went to trial. One because the victim died before the hearing, the other because the victim refused to testify. "Jesus," Joanne whispered. "There's more. I found a 3rd name connected to the Barbados account. Benjamin Wright, 45, former bank manager, fired for embezzlement in 2018. He specializes in offshore accounts, setting them up, hiding the money trail." "So this is, what, a professional operation?" "Looks like it. Michelle's the face. She finds the mark. In this case, Evan. Wright handles the technical side. They split the money." "Does Evan know? About Wright?" "I don't think so," Marcus said. "From what I can tell, Evan thinks it's just him and Michelle. He doesn't know he's being played too." Joanne sat on the edge of her bed, processing. "My son is a victim and a perpetrator." "Yeah, that's about right." "Does that change anything? Legally?" "Not really. He still committed the crime. But it might explain why he did it." Marcus's voice softened. "Look, Mrs. Hayes, I know this is hard, but we need to stay focused. Tomorrow's Sunday. That's when you need to get him talking on record. Can you do that?" Joanne looked at the photograph on her nightstand. Evan at 10 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, holding up a trophy from his science fair. 2nd place in the engineering category. He'd been so proud. "I can do it," she said. At 2 p.m., Grace picked Joanne up. They drove across town to a small apartment complex called Sunset Gardens, a cruel name for a place that looked like Hope had abandoned it years ago. Dorothy Sullivan lived in Unit 12B. She answered the door slowly, leaning on a walker. 78 years old, but she looked 90. Thin to the point of frailty, her white hair sparse, her eyes the watery blue of someone who'd cried too many tears. "Ms. Patterson," Dorothy said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And you must be Joanne." Grace had called ahead, explained the situation. Dorothy had agreed to meet. The apartment was tiny, a studio with a kitchenette, a twin bed, a single armchair. It smelled like old coffee and loneliness. On the wall hung a photograph of a young man in a graduation gown. "My son," Dorothy said, following Joanne's gaze. "Patrick. He was so handsome, wasn't he?" "Was?" Joanne asked gently. "Oh, he's still alive. Somewhere. I just mean, the boy in that picture, the one I raised, he's gone." Dorothy lowered herself into the armchair and gestured for Joanne and Grace to sit on the bed. "Ms. Patterson says your son took your money." "Yes," Joanne said. "He and his wife." "Wife." Dorothy's laugh was bitter. "Let me describe her. Pretty, dark hair, blue-green eyes, smile that could light up a room, wonderful cook, attentive, made you feel like you were the most important person in the world." Joanne's blood ran cold. "That's Michelle. She called herself Rebecca when she was with Patrick, but I saw her picture in the file your detective sent Ms. Patterson. Same woman, same eyes. Those eyes." Dorothy trailed off, staring at nothing. "What happened?" Joanne asked. "Patrick met her online, dating app. She was young, beautiful, and for some reason interested in my 40-year-old son who still lived with his mother. I should have known." Dorothy's hands trembled on the walker's handles. "She was so sweet to me, helped around the house, drove me to doctor appointments. After 6 months, Patrick said they wanted to get married, buy a house. He needed money for the down payment." "How much?" "I gave him $50,000, then another $50,000. Then I signed power of attorney because I was having hip surgery and needed someone to pay my bills while I recovered." Dorothy's voice cracked. 3 months later, $400,000 was gone. My entire retirement. The house was in foreclosure. Patrick and Rebecca had disappeared." "You didn't press charges," Grace said gently. "No, because when the police found them, when they brought them back, Patrick cried. He begged. He said Rebecca had manipulated him, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he was sorry." Dorothy looked at Joanne with hollow eyes. "He was my son, my baby. I couldn't send him to prison." "What happened after?" Joanne asked. "The prosecutor dropped the case. Not enough evidence without my testimony. Rebecca walked away. Patrick promised he'd pay me back, get his life together." Dorothy laughed again, that same bitter sound. "That was 4 years ago. He took the money and left. I haven't heard from him since. Last I heard, he was in Nevada, married someone else." The apartment was silent except for the rain pattering against the window. "Don't make my mistake," Dorothy said, reaching out to grip Joanne's hand with surprising strength. "Don't let love make you weak. They count on that. They count on us being mothers first and people second. But Joanne, if you don't stop him now, he'll do it again. And one day you'll be sitting in an apartment like this, wondering where your life went." Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Joanne woke at 6 a.m. and spent an hour in prayer, not in church, but sitting in the turret room that overlooked the ocean. She wasn't particularly religious, but Michael had been, and sometimes talking to God felt like talking to him. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered to the empty room. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." The ocean had no answers. At 9 a.m., Marcus sent a text. "Device is active. I'm recording. You've got this." At 9:30, Joanne went downstairs and started making breakfast. Pancakes, Evan's favorite. Bacon, fresh orange juice. The smell filled the house, and within minutes she heard footsteps on the stairs. Evan appeared first, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep. He looked so young, so innocent. Pancakes? He said, smiling. What's the occasion? No occasion, Joanne said, flipping a pancake. Just felt like cooking for my boy. Michelle came down a few minutes later, already dressed, her makeup perfect. She kissed Evan on the cheek and poured herself coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, like a normal family having a normal breakfast. Joanne waited until they were halfway through eating. I've been thinking, she said casually, cutting into her pancakes, about that Europe trip. I know you said the market's volatile, Evan, but I really would like to book something soon. While my health is good, I was thinking I'd just log into the retirement account myself, check the balance, and… No! Evan's response was sharp. Too sharp. He caught himself, softened his tone. I mean, Mom, you don't need to do that. I can check for you. It's my account, Joanne said, keeping her voice mild. I should know how to access it. The password's complicated, Michelle interjected smoothly. And honestly, Joanne, you've never been great with technology. Remember when you accidentally deleted all your contacts last year? Better to let Evan handle it. Patronizing, dismissive. Joanne felt anger flare but pushed it down. I just want to see the balance, that's all. Make sure there's enough for the trip. Evan and Michelle exchanged another look. Joanne saw calculation in their eyes. Decision-making. Mom, Evan said finally, there's something I need to tell you. About the account. Here it comes, Joanne thought. She pressed the top of the cross pendant twice, making sure the recording was active. I moved the money, Evan said, to a different investment vehicle. Higher yield, better returns. You'll make a lot more, but it takes time to mature. You can't withdraw from it right now. You moved it? Joanne injected tremor into her voice. All of it? Without asking me? I have power of attorney, Mom. I can make these decisions. That was for emergencies, for when I was sick. You're not thinking clearly about finances, Michelle said, her voice taking on an edge. Evan and I are younger. We understand these things. We moved your money to protect you. Where? Joanne demanded. Where did you move it? A private equity fund, Evan said. The lie came smoothly. Too smoothly. It's complicated, but trust me, Mom. Trust that I'm doing what's best. How much? Joanne whispered. How much did you move? Silence. All of it, Evan said finally. The full $485,000. Joanne let tears well in her eyes. Not hard. They'd been threatening to fall all morning. That's everything I have. Everything your father and I saved for 40 years. You moved it all without telling me? For your own good. Evan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand, Mom. You've never understood what it's like for me. Dad died and left me with nothing but debt. Medical bills, funeral costs. I spent 3 years digging myself out of that hole while you sat on $500,000. The mask was cracking. Evan, Michelle reached for him, warning in her eyes. But Evan was spiraling, the guilt and resentment he'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. You don't need that much money, he shouted. You're 68. How much longer are you going to live? 10 years? 15? You could live on Social Security. But Michelle and me, we have our whole lives ahead of us. We deserve a fresh start, Michelle finished, standing now too. Her composure had slipped. The mask of the dutiful daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Joanne, you've had your life. You've had your career, your marriage, your house. This money, it's just sitting there, going to waste. We can actually use it. Build something. Joanne stood slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Where is it? She asked quietly. Where did you really move my money? Barbados, Evan said, the words tumbling out now. Offshore account. It's safe. It's ours. Michelle set it up. We're leaving Tuesday. Starting over. And you? He laughed, a horrible sound. You can't stop us. By the time you figure out how to check your account, we'll be gone. The kitchen door opened. Detective Marcus Cole stepped through, 2 uniformed officers behind him. Actually, Marcus said, his voice flat and professional, you're not going anywhere. The color drained from Evan's face. Michelle moved fast, reaching for her purse on the counter, but one of the officers was faster. He caught her wrist. Evan Hayes. Michelle Hayes. Marcus pulled out handcuffs. You're under arrest for wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Mom, Evan's voice broke. Mom, wait, I can explain. You have the right to remain silent, Marcus continued, snapping the cuffs onto Evan's wrists. Evan crumpled, literally fell to his knees, sobbing. I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't. Michelle said I wasn't thinking. Michelle, in contrast, went rigid, silent. When the officer cuffed her, she didn't resist. She just turned and looked at Joanne with those cold, beautiful eyes. You'll regret this, Michelle said quietly. He's your son. You're sending your own son to prison. No, Joanne said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You sent him to prison. I'm just making sure he gets there. They were led out. Evan looked back once, his face destroyed, his mouth forming the word Mom over and over. Joanne stood in her kitchen and watched them go. Grace emerged from the hallway. She'd been hiding in the study, a witness, and wrapped Joanne in her arms. You did it, Grace whispered. You did the right thing. But if it was the right thing, Joanne wondered, why did it feel like dying? The next 72 hours were a blur of police stations, lawyers, and paperwork. Marcus brought Joanne into the station Monday morning for a formal statement. She sat in the same interview room where this had started and recounted everything again. The recording from the pendant was entered into evidence. Clear, damning, undeniable. We've frozen the Barbados account, Marcus told her Tuesday afternoon. The money's still there, most of it anyway. There was a second transfer we're tracking, $50,000 to someone named Benjamin Wright. Who is he? Joanne asked, though she already knew from their earlier conversation. Tech guy. Sets up offshore accounts for a fee. We picked him up this morning. He's cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. Wednesday, Benjamin Wright's lawyer contacted the DA with a plea deal. Wright would testify against Michelle and provide all documentation of the offshore accounts. In exchange, 5 years instead of 15. Marcus showed Joanne the details in his office. Wright says Michelle hired him back in April, Marcus explained. Paid him $50,000 up front from an earlier, let's call it a job. His role was to set up the Barbados account, make sure the money trail was hidden. Did Evan know about Wright? No. According to Wright, Evan thought it was just him and Michelle. The plan was to split $485,000 between them. But Michelle's real plan? Marcus slid a piece of paper across the desk. One-way ticket to Barbados, 1 passenger, departing Tuesday at 6 p.m., booked under the name Michelle Rodriguez. Joanne stared at the paper. She was going to leave him. Yep. Take the money and run. Leave Evan here to face the music. Wright says Michelle told him, quote, Evan's the patsy. He'll take the fall while I disappear. So my son? Joanne struggled to find the words. He was a victim too. He was a victim who chose to victimize you, Marcus said gently. Mrs. Hayes, I know this is complicated. Evan's not innocent. He made choices. But yeah, he was being played. Michelle's done this before. She's good at finding people who are vulnerable. Financial problems, family issues, insecurities, and exploiting them. Thursday, Marcus called with more news. We traced Michelle's background further. Her real name, before all the changes, was Michelle Adriana Rodriguez, born 1992 in Albuquerque. Mother died when she was 12. Father was abusive, in and out of jail. She dropped out of high school at 16, worked multiple jobs to support 2 younger siblings. Joanne didn't know what to say. That's terrible. It is. At 20, she met a man named David Stevens, 65, wealthy, widowed. They dated for 2 years. He promised to marry her, help her siblings. Then he died suddenly, heart attack. His adult children inherited everything. They kicked Michelle out, gave her nothing. Joanne closed her eyes. She could imagine the pain, the betrayal, the desperation. After that, Marcus continued, she changed, started targeting elderly people with money. Her logic, according to the psychiatrist who evaluated her in 2016, was that she was reclaiming what should have been hers. She doesn't see it as theft. She sees it as balancing the scales. That doesn't make it right, Joanne said. No, but it explains it. Friday, Sarah Kim, the forensic accountant Grace had hired, delivered her report. The news was mixed. We can recover $395,000, Sarah explained, spreading documents across Grace's conference table. $380,000 from the Barbados account. It'll take 3 to 6 months to navigate the international legal process, but it's possible. Plus $15,000 that Wright still had in his personal account. That's been seized. And the rest? Joanne asked. Sarah's expression was grim. $55,000 is gone, transferred to an anonymous account in Switzerland 48 hours before we froze everything. Michelle's refusing to provide information about it. Without her cooperation, we can't trace it. So I'm losing $55,000 plus another $35,000 that Wright already spent. Casino gambling, luxury purchases. It's gone. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. Joanne did the math in her head. $485,000 stolen. $395,000 recovered. $90,000 gone forever. Plus legal fees. Grace was working pro bono, but there were court costs, filing fees. Probably another $15,000 to $20,000 before this was over. She'd started with $485,000. She'd end up with maybe $375,000. Nearly a quarter of her life savings gone. It could have been worse, Grace said quietly. If we'd waited even another day, more would have disappeared. Joanne nodded numbly. I know. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. That night, alone in her house, Joanne sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of Michael's whiskey, the good stuff he'd been saving for a special occasion. She poured 2 fingers into a glass and raised it to the empty chair across from her. To the life we planned, she said to the ghost of her husband. And the one I'm left with. She drank. The whiskey burned going down, but she welcomed it. Physical pain she could handle. It was the other kind, the kind that came from watching your child being led away in handcuffs, that threatened to break her. But Joanne Hayes didn't break. She finished the whiskey, washed the glass, and went to bed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she'd start rebuilding. 6 months passed like a slow-motion car crash. Inevitable, unstoppable, and devastating to witness. March arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that matched the mood in courtroom 4 of the County Superior Court. Joanne sat in the front row, flanked by Grace on one side and Dorothy Sullivan on the other. Behind them, the gallery was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and advocates from elder abuse organizations who'd caught wind of the case. Judge Margaret Holloway presided, a woman of 58 with steel-gray hair and a reputation for being fair but merciless toward those who preyed on the vulnerable. Evan sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit provided by his public defender. He'd lost weight in jail, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at Joanne. Hadn't looked at her since the arraignment 4 months ago. Michelle sat at the adjacent table, perfectly composed. Her lawyer was expensive. Where she'd gotten the money, no one could prove, but everyone suspected the missing $55,000 had funded it. She wore a conservative navy dress, minimal makeup, her dark hair pulled back. She looked like a young professional who'd been wrongly accused. She looked like she might actually get away with it. The prosecution called their witnesses methodically. Marcus Cole testified about the investigation. Sarah Kim explained the money trail with charts and graphs. Benjamin Wright, looking nervous and defeated, described exactly how he'd helped Michelle set up the offshore accounts. She told me Evan was temporary, Wright said, his voice barely audible. That he was, in her words, the perfect patsy. She planned to take the money and disappear. Evan would be left holding the bag. Evan flinched like he'd been struck. Michelle's expression never changed. Then came Dorothy Sullivan. The elderly woman walked slowly to the witness stand, leaning heavily on her walker. but when she spoke, her voice was strong. "I sat in my apartment for 4 years," Dorothy said, "wondering if I'd made the right choice. Wondering if protecting my son had been an act of love or an act of cowardice." She looked directly at Michelle. "That woman, or someone who looked exactly like her, took everything from me. And my son let her. I didn't press charges because I thought love meant sacrifice. I was wrong. Love without accountability is just enabling." The courtroom was silent. On the third day, the defense presented their cases. Evan's public defender painted him as a victim, manipulated by a professional con artist, struggling under debt from his father's medical bills, desperate and foolish, but not malicious. "My client made a terrible mistake," the lawyer argued. "But he was a pawn in Michelle Rodriguez's game. He deserves mercy." Michelle's lawyer took a different approach. She hadn't forced Evan to do anything. He'd had power of attorney. He'd made the transfers. Yes, she'd benefited, but she was merely Evan's girlfriend. She hadn't held a gun to his head. "The prosecution wants you to believe Michelle Rodriguez is a criminal mastermind," her lawyer said smoothly. "But where's the proof? Circumstantial evidence, coincidences, the word of a man trying to reduce his own sentence. My client is guilty of nothing but being in the wrong relationship." On the fourth day, Joanne was called to testify. She walked to the stand in a charcoal suit, her gray hair neatly styled, her makeup subtle. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Chen, led her through the basics. The discovery, the recording, the confrontation. Joanne's answers were clear and factual. Then it was Michelle's lawyer's turn. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his tone gentle but probing. "You love your son, don't you?" "Yes," Joanne said. "And you want what's best for him?" "I want him to be a good person. That's what's best for him." "But sending him to prison, that seems harsh for a first-time offender, doesn't it? Someone who was, by all accounts, manipulated?" "Objection," Angela said. "Speculation about manipulation." "Sustained," Judge Holloway ruled. The lawyer tried again. "Mrs. Hayes, if you truly love your son, why seek such severe punishment? Why not handle this as a family matter?" Joanne looked at the lawyer, then at the jury, then finally at Evan. Her son was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. "Because love isn't enough," Joanne said quietly. "I love my son. I will always love my son. But that doesn't mean I should allow him to destroy himself and others without consequence. If I had stayed silent, I would have taught him that he could betray the people who love him and face no repercussions. That would have been the greatest failure of my life as a mother." She took a breath, her voice strengthening. "My son made choices. Terrible choices. He chose to steal from me. He chose to plan to abandon me. Those choices have consequences. Love doesn't erase that. It shouldn't erase that." "Even if it means he goes to prison?" "Especially if it means he goes to prison," Joanne said. "Because maybe that's where he'll finally learn the lesson I failed to teach him, that people aren't resources to be exploited. That trust is sacred. That being someone's child doesn't give you the right to treat them as less than human." The courtroom was utterly silent. "Mrs. Hayes," Angela said on redirect, "what do you hope comes from this trial?" Joanne thought for a long moment. "I hope," she said finally, "that every person sitting in this courtroom who's being abused by someone they love, financially, emotionally, in any way, sees that they have the right to stand up. That being family doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. And I hope my son, wherever this journey takes him, learns to be better than he was." The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty, on all counts. Both defendants. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Holloway looked at Michelle first. "Ms. Rodriguez," the judge said, her voice cold, "you are a predator. You have systematically targeted vulnerable people, exploited their trust, and destroyed their lives. The evidence shows this is not your first offense. It won't be your last if I have anything to say about it. 12 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole before 8 years served. Michelle's face remained impassive. She didn't blink. Then the judge turned to Evan. Mr. Hayes, you are a more complicated case. The evidence suggests you were manipulated, yes. But you were also a willing participant. You made conscious choices to betray your mother's trust. However, I do believe there is hope for rehabilitation. 6 years in state prison. Possibility of parole after 4 years with good behavior. Mandatory psychological counseling. Evan broke down completely. His sobs echoed through the courtroom. As they were led away, Evan looked back one last time. "Mom," he choked out. "Mom, please." Joanne met his eyes. She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't give him any comfort. She just looked at him until he turned away. Chapter 9. The Long Road. 1 year later, Joanne stood in front of a room full of people and told her story. The Hayes Foundation, co-founded with Dorothy Sullivan and funded by donations plus $50,000 from Joanne's recovered money, had become a lifeline for elderly people facing financial abuse. They provided free legal consultation, forensic accounting services, and emotional support groups. In 12 months, they'd helped 23 victims, recovered over $1.2 million in stolen assets, secured 8 criminal convictions. Dorothy ran the administrative side, finally finding purpose again. Grace volunteered her legal expertise. Marcus Cole sat on the advisory board. And Joanne? She became the face of survival. The woman who'd fought back and won. "People ask me if I regret it," Joanne said to the room of donors and supporters. "If I regret sending my own son to prison, the answer is no. Not because I don't love him, but because loving him meant refusing to enable his destruction of himself and others." Applause filled the room. After the event, Grace pulled Joanne aside. "You've had a request," Grace said carefully. "From the prison. Evan wants to see you." Joanne's heart clenched. 14 months. 14 months since the sentencing. She hadn't visited, hadn't written, hadn't taken his calls. "What do you want to do?" Grace asked. Joanne thought about Dorothy, who'd given her son a second chance and been abandoned. She thought about the countless victims who'd stayed silent out of misplaced loyalty. She thought about the boy Evan had been and the man he'd become. "I'll go," she said finally. "Once, to see where he is." The state prison was exactly as grim as Joanne had imagined. Gray concrete, razor wire, guards with expressionless faces. She was searched, questioned, and finally led to a visitation room divided by thick plexiglass. Evan was already there. He looked different. His hair was buzzed short, going gray at the temples, though he was only 36. He'd lost more weight. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked older, tired. He looked broken. They picked up phones on either side of the glass. "Hi, Mom," Evan said, his voice cracking. "Evan," silence stretched between them. "Thank you for coming," Evan said finally. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't. I've been in therapy, twice a week. Dr. Ramirez, he's helping me understand." Evan's hands shook. "I was so angry, Mom. At Dad for dying and leaving debts. At myself for failing at everything I tried. At you for having what I thought I deserved. Michelle, she found all those buttons and pushed them. That doesn't excuse what you did," Joanne said quietly. "I know. God, Mom, I know." Tears streamed down Evan's face. "I stole from you. I planned to abandon you. I said terrible things. I don't know how to live with that." "You learn," Joanne said. "You face it. You do better. Can you?" Evan struggled with the words. "Can you ever forgive me?" Joanne looked at her son, this man she'd raised, this stranger who'd betrayed her, and felt the complexity of love in all its painful glory. "I don't know," she said honestly. Maybe someday, but Evan, forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. Even if I forgive you, that doesn't mean we go back to how things were. That version of us is gone. I understand. Do you? Joanne leaned forward. Do you understand that you didn't just steal money? You stole my sense of safety, my trust, my ability to believe that the person I loved most in the world wouldn't hurt me. That doesn't heal quickly. It might never fully heal. I'm so sorry, Evan whispered. I believe you are. But sorry isn't enough. You need to rebuild yourself. Not for me, not to earn my forgiveness, but because you need to become someone who would never do this again, to anyone. I'm trying, Mom. Every day I'm trying. Joanne stood. The visit was over. Evan, she said, her hand on the phone. This is the only visit for now. You need to do your work, the therapy, the self-reflection, without expecting me to be part of it. If you get out and you've genuinely changed, we can talk then, but not before. How long do I have to wait? As long as it takes, Joanne said. And maybe, if you do the work, one day we'll have breakfast together. Just us, and we'll see what's possible. She hung up the phone and walked away. Behind her, through the glass, Evan wept. Tit. Chapter 10. The Breakfast of Reckoning. 4 years passed. Evan was released on a Tuesday in August 2029, 6 months early for good behavior. He was 39 years old, graying, weathered, and alone. No job prospects, no home, no family waiting. Grace helped him find a room in a halfway house and a job washing dishes at a diner. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. He didn't contact Joanne. Not right away. He attended Gamblers Anonymous. His therapist in prison had helped him recognize the addiction that had started his downward spiral. He took night classes in computer repair. He saved every penny. 6 months after his release, he moved into a small efficiency apartment. Nothing fancy, a studio with a kitchenette and a view of a parking lot, but it was his, earned through his own labor. He sent Joanne a letter, not asking for anything, just updating her on his life, apologizing again, telling her about the therapy, the job, the slow process of rebuilding. She didn't respond. He sent another letter 3 months later, and another 3 months after that. Still no response. Then, one March morning, 5 years after the trial, an envelope arrived at Evan's apartment. Cream-colored paper, Joanne's elegant handwriting. Inside was a single card. Breakfast, Sunday 10 a.m. My apartment, just us. Evan stood outside his mother's condo building, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, and trying to remember how to breathe. 5 years. 5 years since he'd seen her in person. He almost turned around, almost ran, but he'd come too far to run now. He pressed the buzzer. The door unlocked. Joanne's apartment was on the 4th floor, overlooking the ocean. Smaller than the Victorian house. She'd sold that 3 years ago, unable to live in the space where everything had fallen apart. This place was modern, bright, filled with light. She opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Joanne looked at him for a long moment. She was 73 now, her hair fully gray, her face lined with experiences he'd caused and others he'd missed. But her eyes were clear, strong. "Come in," she said. The apartment smelled like coffee and pancakes, Evan's favorite breakfast. They sat on the balcony overlooking the water. The table was set simply, 2 plates, 2 mugs, a carafe of coffee, pancakes, bacon, eggs. Ordinary, normal. They ate in silence for several minutes. "Thank you," Evan said finally, "for this, for even—" "Don't," Joanne said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. This is just breakfast. That's all. I know. I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "I wasn't sure I did," Joanne said honestly. "Grace thought I should. Dorothy thought I was crazy. But I needed to see for myself if you'd actually changed." "Have I?" Evan asked. Changed? You haven't asked me for money. You haven't made excuses. You've built a life for yourself without leaning on anyone. Joanne took a sip of coffee. That's a start. I go to therapy twice a week, Evan said. Still, Dr. Martinez helped me understand. I was using other people to avoid my own failures. Dad's death, my gambling debts, my career problems. I blamed everyone else. I blamed you for having money when I had debt, as if your success was somehow my failure. And now? Now I understand that my life is mine to build. Not from your money, not from anyone's money, from my own work. Evan looked out at the ocean. I'm not the person you raised, Mom. That person got lost somewhere. But I'm trying to become someone you might be able to respect again. Someday. Joanne set down her coffee cup. Evan, I need you to understand something. What you did, it wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal so profound that it changed me. I don't trust easily anymore. I don't sleep soundly. I check my bank accounts daily. I see manipulation in kindness. She paused. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my peace. I know, Evan whispered. I live with that every day. Good. You should. Joanne's voice was firm, but not cruel. Because the consequences of our actions don't end when we apologize. They ripple forward. Can you ever forgive me? Joanne looked at her son, this man who carried her DNA and her late husband's smile, this person who had hurt her more than anyone else ever could. I don't know, she said. Forgiveness is complicated. Some days I think I have. Other days the anger comes back so strong I can barely breathe. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. But I'm willing to try. Slowly, carefully, without promises. What does that mean? Evan asked. It means we can have breakfast, occasionally. It means I'll listen to how your life is going. It means if you continue doing the work, the real work of being better, we might build something new, not what we had. That's gone forever. But something else. Something honest. I'll take it, Evan said, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'll take whatever you're willing to give. Then finish your breakfast, Joanne said, pulling her hand back. The pancakes are getting cold. They ate together as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the water. The silence between them was no longer heavy with accusation, but lighter, tentative, fragile, but alive with possibility. When breakfast was finished, Evan stood to leave. Mom, he said at the door, can I hug you? Joanne considered. 5 years ago, the answer would have been no. Even 6 months ago, probably no. But today? Briefly, she said. Evan embraced her carefully, as if she might break. She stood rigid at first, then slowly, her arms came up and circled his back. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to hold her child. Then she stepped back. Same time next month, she said. If you want. I want, Evan said. More than anything. As he left, Joanne returned to the balcony. She poured herself another cup of coffee and looked out at the ocean, the endless horizon where water met sky. She thought about Michael, about the life they'd planned and the one she'd been forced to build alone. She thought about Evan as a boy, full of promise. Evan as a man, full of choices. She thought about Dorothy Sullivan, about the 23 families the Hayes Foundation had helped, about the good that had come from her pain. And she thought about herself, Joanne Hayes, 73 years old, cancer survivor, widow, mother of a convicted felon, and fighter who had refused to become a victim. She'd lost money. She'd lost her son in some ways. She'd lost her innocence about family and trust. But she'd found something too, her own strength, her voice, her refusal to let cruelty define her story. Michelle had been wrong. Joanne wouldn't die alone and bitter. She would live surrounded by people she'd helped, causes she'd championed, and the hard-won knowledge that love without boundaries is destruction by another name. The ocean stretched before her, vast and endless. Somewhere out there, Evan was walking back to his small apartment, carrying the weight of his choices and the fragile gift of a second chance. Somewhere out there, Michelle sat in a prison cell, counting down 8 years until freedom. And here, on this balcony, with coffee growing cold and seagulls crying overhead, Joanne Hayes sat with her ghosts and her victories. Not happy exactly, but at peace. And that, she had learned, was enough.